I'm the co-founder of a nonprofit based in Boulder called Local Food Shift Group. We've been focused on the issue of localizing our food supply for the last several years. I have to confess that I feel a little rattled coming up here this afternoon after hearing Jerry's presentation. I think I'm probably going to violate a good number of his on local food. And it just, I'm probably going to get myself in trouble today, but it's a risk I will take. But after hearing that presentation today, and apologies to Jill, where'd Jill go?
Right here.
I see. I'm not sure government can do this. I'm not sure that government should do this. So, to come at this from a completely different direction, I started thinking recently about why farmers farm. And if you ask many of our farmers, especially the older and the more conventional, they say that they want to feed the world. And that is such a peculiar aspiration, especially since most of our commodity crop farming today really has very little to do with food for people. You know, food for cars maybe, food for livestock maybe, but for people, not so much. And even the agricultural output from them, which is turned into some kind of processed food-like substance that gets marketed as food, when you really look at that, that's not the kind of thing that you'd really want anyone that you loved or cared for to eat. So what is this about farming to feed the world? Well, it's an idea, it's a meme, actually, that has been systematically implanted in our farmers and our agricultural policymakers by big agribusiness. That's what they want our farmers to think they are doing, and what they want us to think that our farmers are doing. It's a big economic driver, this meme of feeding the world, that has our Colorado agriculture, for instance, exporting nearly everything that it produces. As a result, we residents of Colorado have to import at least 97% of everything that we eat from outside the state. These are signs of a deeply destructive madness that has gripped our society since World War II. And because of this insanity, it's almost impossible to have a rational discussion about food and farming today. Because many people, too many people, are profoundly driven by propagandistic memes that have become unimpeachable articles of religious faith beyond examination or dialogue. It's a sad commentary on our societal illness that much of the science of food and farming serves the same idea, that our agriculture must feed the world, and that it's all about the numbers, the data, the yields, the dollars, the profits, the GDP, and such science in the service of commerce and profits can be extremely destructive, and it has been. During the aftermath of last year's floods, we met a number of conventional and commodity crop farmers and ranchers in northern Colorado who had been hit pretty hard. And they were really suffering in their isolation. They felt that no one cared about them, not even the government. And they felt betrayed. They felt full of rage. Well, that's the kind of vulnerable position that you put yourself in when you're trying to feed the world. You're not feeding anyone in particular, and no one in particular cares about you. There's nothing local or relational about any of it. And during those dark days last year, we also talked with a number of small and medium-sized farmers impacted by the flood, market farmers, who are really focused on selling locally, which produces an entirely different kind of experience, different quality of experience. The outpouring of support that these small farmers and ranchers received from their communities after the flood was very moving. We could see and feel in the midst of all of that the weaving and enlightening of a network of connection that has almost gone extinct in our nation. I'll never forget a few years back going on a Boulder County farm tour. And when the group arrived in buses at a ranch which was raising grass-fed cattle, the rancher, I believe his third generation, he was standing on the back of a flatbed trailer out in the pasture talking to all these people, telling them about his ranch. And I'd say that most of the people in the group had never been on a working ranch before, and probably most of them had never heard a rancher say very much. And when it came time for questions, there was a lady in the group who stepped forward and asked, "Do you sell any of your beef locally?" And "No," said the farmer, the rancher. He was just sort of surprised. "No." And the lady said, "Well, why not?" And suddenly finding himself in very uncomfortable territory, the farmer said, "Well, I guess I never really thought about it." And this lady, bless her heart, she wasn't about to let it go. She said, "Would you consider it?" And, well, by this time, the people were starting to feel really uncomfortable. And the rancher, he thought for a few seconds, and then he said, "Well, if I knew the market was there, I'd consider it." What I started thinking about was, how was it that that rancher, who was clearly very conscientious about how he raised his livestock, how was it that he didn't know that there was a local market for what he produced? And how was it that we, standing there in his pasture, didn't know that wholesome grass-fed beef was being produced right in our own backyard? I've thought a lot about that in the last few years. And in the last few years, I've heard a lot of farmers and ranchers say, if the market was there, well, now we know the market is there. Over the last few decades, we've seen the steady growth of the organic food industry, recently growing at a rate of about 10 to 12% a year. In 2013, total organic industry sales in the U.S. reached a record $35.1 billion. Roughly, allegedly, 4% of the total food industry in this country. But if you read down into the fine print of these glowing reports about all these developments, you'll see that organic farming accounts for only about 1% of total farmland in the U.S. And there is growing concern now, because of the very slow rate of conversion of conventional farms to organic, that the rapid growth of the organic food industry simply cannot continue. In other words, it's unsustainable. Interesting. But another aspect of this, in early 2012, just over 2 years ago, for the first time we began seeing industry data pointing to the stunning news that more people were preferring local food than they were preferring organic food. Very interesting. This is a milestone, a marker of a very significant shift in our society. What's significant to me is that the organic food industry has been built by the very same kinds of marketing and advertising that has been used to build the industrial food industry. But the local food industry is being driven by what they call consumer demand. Well, I have, as some of you know, I have a great deal of contempt for the word consumer. I feel that it's an economically derisive term. It's very insulting. But anyway, the local food industry, which hit an estimated $10 billion last year, and will likely grow to eclipse the organic food industry just in the next few years, the local food industry is being driven by eaters, people like you and me. Can you feel how revolutionary this is? This is happening not because of powerful and well-financed marketing campaigns, but because people like you and me have decided that we want our food to be produced as locally as possible, that we want to know who grew our food and how they grew it. We want to make sure that our food is as fresh and as healthy and as nutritious as possible, and we will do whatever it takes and pay whatever we have to have such food, because we know that it is essential to the health and well-being of our bodies, our families, our communities, our environment, and our economies. This is unprecedented, a consumer-driven industry. And it's a phenomenon that traditional marketers haven't quite figured out how to respond to yet. But many of them are certainly trying to find ways to exploit it. Eaters today want to know the story of their food, the story behind it, and the story of those who produced it. And we expect distributors and retailers and chefs to carry that story all the way through the supply chain, from the field to the fork. And I'm amazed to see how few well-meaning food entrepreneurs fail to understand this, fail to grasp that this is their opportunity to distinguish themselves from their less conscious competition. But the big news is that the market is there. The market for locally produced, sustainably and compassionately raised food. In fact, the demand for local food, we're finding now, far outstrips supply. And the food purveyors and entrepreneurs and farmers who don't consciously and proactively serve this rapidly growing market will quickly find themselves left behind. Depending upon whose estimates you'd like to believe, in the entire state of Colorado, we still source only 1.5% to 3% of our food from within this state. There's a lot of rancorous debate about these estimates, of course, particularly among economists. In Denver, Rusty Collins, who heads up CSU's extension office in Denver, he says publicly that actually we're only at 1% local in Colorado. And in that dismal number, he includes food that is grown outside of Colorado but processed or value added here within the state. Well, I think many of us in this line of work know that localizing our food supply is something of an uphill battle. But we also know that it's absolutely necessary if we're going to avoid a fast-arriving reality where starvation is no longer just a third world phenomenon. For instance, if we look out over the horizon and see the storm clouds of climate change brewing and if we calculate the inevitable impact on global food production, then we know that we're going to have to quickly and significantly ramp up our local food production capacity in order to feed our local populations. And that communities and food sheds all over the world are going to have to do the same. And now we need to grab a little bit of water here. This happens when I get rattled. I start losing my voice. There are very good... Pardon me?
So tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, rattled. There are very good reasons why connecting with our local food shed kindles very deep feelings that often bring about a fundamental shift in our orientation towards life. The structure of our society has radically disconnected us from the living earth and from life itself. And many of us here have become deeply aware of this. A living food shed is literally life-giving in a way that perhaps nothing else can be. It is truly regenerative. And it is as subversive and radical and unfolding as anything that we can discover happening in the world today. The local food revolution represents the awakening of biophilia, which Woody talks about, our innate love for life itself. So food is not to be trivialized or commoditized, otherwise we demean its provenance, its origins, and we lose the relatedness. We're left disconnected, separate, bereft. I think it's safe to say, there's a lot of talk about food deserts these days, but I think it's safe to say that actually almost all of us in this country still live in a food desert, where healthy, fresh, local, sustainably produced food is hardly available to anyone except the relatively wealthy or those who have learned to grow food themselves. We may have a long way to go, but we have come a very long way in the last several years. But to be clear, it's not that any of us working on food localization know how to do this. We don't. It's so amazing that Jerry was here today. Because I remember when now Mayor Michael Hancock was running for office in Denver a few years ago. He began speaking about a goal for Denver of 20% local food by 2020. And I know for sure he didn't have a plan for getting there. And that's part of why he hired Jerry to develop a plan. They still don't have a plan. And I'd like to humbly suggest today that perhaps the project of localizing a food shed or a regional food supply is not something that can be planned. You can't make this happen. It's a revolution. And this revolution flies in the face of many of our institutions and policies and economic structures. And it comes from the people themselves, the people ourselves, eaters, not consumers. The current global industrial food system has been engineered and built over the last 60 years or so by an unholy alliance of big ag, big food, and big pharma, all supported by big government and big banking. Not coincidentally, they have been using the same kinds of unethical and exploitive strategies that have been employed in the past by big tobacco, only with much more disastrous and far-reaching consequences, to the point that they now control all but a tiny portion of our food supply. And of course, they intend to control all 100%. We can't plan our way out of this mess any more than the leaders of our world's nations can get together and plan how to get climate change under control. Here's the thing: we cannot make food localization happen because it's already happening. It's a revolution, and it's already way ahead of us. There's no way to control this, thankfully, because it's already out of control. And this will make planners and policymakers crazy. That doesn't mean, however, that there aren't forces who are aligning to crush this food revolution and stop it in its tracks. There certainly are. And they've got very deep pockets and are very focused in their mission to control the world's food supply for their profit. But they don't know how to stop a revolution that's being driven by millions of people who are rapidly awakening to both harsh realities and inspiring possibilities all at the same time. As tiny as we are right now, what makes this particular revolution so threatening to the unholy alliance is that it is beginning to restore the connections that they have managed to systematically sever. You know, the so-called food that they want to push down our throats actually disconnects us from life and from each other. And the magnitude of the tragedy that they have inflicted on our society is heartbreaking, and our hearts have been broken, to the point that we will not tolerate this travesty any longer. We here today, I believe, are all part of this local food revolution, but don't tell anybody just yet. It's okay for now that the powers that be just think that this is a nice, harmless, little local food lifestyle movement that's happening here. In reality, the local food revolution just might be the most subversive people's movement in human history. The truth is, we are being mobilized by something greater than ourselves. In a revolution, we are first called and challenged to respond, and then we decide whether or not we can align with the fundamental aims of the revolution, and whether we will become revolutionaries ourselves. In our organization, we think of this role as evolutionary catalyst, which means becoming so aligned with the underlying evolutionary thrust that drives this movement, this revolution, that we seek not to control it or to shape it, but to contribute to it, to support it, to give to it, to be connected with it in heart, body, mind, and soul. We're all capable, I think, of sensing, really feeling where the centers of aliveness are in all of this. Those places where forces are powerfully converging that are the very heart of this revolution. I doubt that many of our farmers think of themselves as revolutionaries, but if they're working to serve their local population, to feed their communities, then they are certainly engaged in revolutionary activities. They are creating centers of aliveness. And we can feel this. Local food is not a lifestyle choice, but a choice for life itself. A life-giving, life-restoring, life-generating choice. It is the beginning of the reversal of the devastation that we have unleashed on this planet. Here in the Colorado Front Range, we have the great privilege to witness and even be a part of the awakening of a regional food shed and the emergence of a true local food culture. And when I have been listening to the stories of what's happening here in the Colorado Springs area and in southern Colorado, I'm deeply moved. And at the same time, I'm greatly saddened because I know that even our fellow local food folks up in Denver and Boulder and Fort Collins know almost nothing about what's happening here. And if they knew, they would be inspired. They would learn from what you're doing here. And the revolution then would accelerate. And of course, the reverse is also true. There are great things happening around local food in those other areas that most people here know nothing about. And if you knew, you would celebrate. And more than that, if we all knew more about what was emerging in our regional food shed, we would be moved to get together with each other and learn from each other and inspire each other. We would forge bonds of collaboration and cooperation and deep connection that would ensure that this local food revolution will grow and prevail over the evil that has gripped our food supply and the very heart of our society. It's time for this to begin happening. Together we need to learn to think like a food shed. There is such a great need here for a regional local food system. Even Jerry alluded to this. There are so many people involved in various aspects of local food these days, but so few among them who are thinking systemically. Many, of course, are involved in wonderful projects and creating companies and organization, and lots more are working on individual or family or neighborhood food projects. But who is truly moving towards collaborating to build our regional food shed as a functioning, integrated food supply chain? Who is consciously working towards building the local food economy as a living food shed? No organization or company or institution or government can do this. The only way an integrated regional food system can emerge is if we are consciously building it together. And this can't be made to happen. It must be cultivated and nurtured. And the seeds have already been planted. We're learning, I think, that all revolution begins locally and that all evolution is truly local. Our current interest in our organization is in how we can catalyze and cultivate and support the emergence of a regional food shed and the centers of aliveness emerging within it. That's very different from the realm of goals and plans and objectives and metrics. And it's very difficult to explain to funders. The overarching mission which we and many others together serve is to localize our food supply to the greatest extent possible. But perhaps that framing puts us falsely in the realm of goals and metrics. Maybe we're not seeing this quite right. Maybe that realm is still too materialistic and mechanistic, even artificial. I'm beginning to thinking about what we're really doing here is catalyzing the awakening of a food shed as a living being. Those of you involved in permaculture may understand what I'm talking about. We're catalyzing living, generative centers within this emerging food shed. We cannot measure the value of a living food shed, neither its present value or its future value, any more than we can measure the value of a child. It is priceless, far beyond economics. That's very difficult to express. but it's not hard to feel. So I'll try to wrap this up here. We need to learn to love our food shed and what's emerging within it. To nurture it, to give to it, and to allow it to give to us. This is a profound relationship. It's really about loving our food shed into existence. We're touching on the realm of the sacred here. And I have not yet found the ways to speak about this. Words fail. But I do know that this is sacred work that we're doing together. And that through this work, the sacred moves in us and through us. And the relationships that are created thereby are nothing less than sacred. Food is sacred and mysteriously sacramental. The local food revolution is the front line of the struggle to preserve human freedom and sovereignty. It is here that we have the opportunity to begin reversing the profound damage to our planet and to ourselves since the Industrial Revolution. We could even say that food is right at the heart of the struggle between the forces of goodness and the forces of evil on this planet. It's no wonder that localizing our food supply and reclaiming our food sovereignty and food security are so difficult. There is great resistance to these efforts and even great opposition. And I suspect most of us working in all of this feel that opposition every day. But this is not a war. It's a revolution. The beginnings of a great turning over. No one is telling us to do this. We simply know in our hearts that this must happen. No matter how difficult it might be, no matter how long it might take. And we understand that this is possibly a Sisyphean task, and that the odds are profoundly stacked against us. And we know as well that the profound damage unleashed by the global industrial food system is just beginning to become visible, and that its consequences will accelerate and will be with us for a very long time. Climate change is forever. The environment will not go back to what it once was. The world will never be what it once was, and we as a people will never be the same. But we also know that the process of regenerating the conditions that are conducive to what we know life can be begins right here, at the front lines of the local food revolution. This is where the healing begins. This is where we draw the line and declare that we're taking back our food supply. This is where we draw the line and say no to the global industrial food system. This is where we draw the line and say that all ends here, for we are planting the seeds of our own living food shed, and we will cultivate and nurture those seeds until they become so deeply rooted that no one will ever be able to steal our food supply from us again. We shall become food sovereigns, secure in the knowledge that as a people we are able to meet our own essential food needs locally. This is freedom, this is sovereignty, and it begins right here, right now. Thank you all for being part of this local food revolution.